Hi there guys, I'm just recording this off my phone real quick, so excuse the less than perfect quality. Before I say anything else, you're probably wondering what the hell this is about. Well, long story short, I have an eye disease called keratoconus, which basically means that my cornea is misshapen, so I've had an operation for that last week. And while it went well and everything is shaping up fine, it does mean that vision in my left eye is going to be blurry for a while, so you might see me wearing this in vlogs or in streams and such things, so just get used to that for a while. I might even wear it in actual videos, but we'll see about that. Anyway, now for the important part. I had the great pleasure last month of attending the Bloody Weekend Genre Film Festival, an annual film festival here in Denmark where we have some cool guests. Last year you may remember that I interviewed Lloyd Kaufman of Troma fame. This year we had another guest of honor, namely Brian Yuzna, who you may know as the producer of Re-Animator and the director of great films like Return of the Living Dead 3 and Society. And once again, I was allowed to interview this man, and he said some really interesting stuff, and as the cool guy he is, he also allowed me to put the full, unedited audio interview online for you guys. Now, like with Kaufman, this is just audio. I didn't actually have any video footage, and I just recorded this for the sake of transcribing it for an article. So there's no video of me and him, unfortunately. And there's got to be some background noise because I record that at a theater. You can hear people in the background, and I may be laughing a bit at what he says at times, but he says some cool stuff. There are some fun stories, and I just thought you guys deserve to hear this too. So here it is, my interview with horror legend Brian Yuzna. It will record. There we go. All right, Brian. Thank you a lot for taking the time for this.
My pleasure.
And if you'll just excuse me for a second while I find the questions, I have a fair bit here. It's very exciting to have you here. So here we go. Right. Admittedly, some of this you already kind of answered during the panel. And but what would you say was what got you into filmmaking as a whole in the first place? Like before you even thought I'll be a producer or I'll be a director. What made you look towards movies specifically?
Well, I didn't prepare for any future when I was growing up.
Yeah.
It was the 60s, the 70s, and
Yeah.
everybody just tuned in, and dropped out.
Mm.
And when I had to make a living, I tried many different ways.
Yeah.
I was a carpenter. I built houses. I painted paintings and sold them. I had an art supply store. I had a sandwich shop. Anything to make money.
Yeah.
I tried to do.
Going to turn this up a little bit.
And I was always, when I went to college, I studied religion and art. So that's when I started painting and stuff like that. And I always liked creative stuff. Of course, I was a movie fan all my life, but almost everybody is. I doubt if you'll find anybody who wasn't a big movie fan. And I was a horror movie fan, and I loved horror and horror stories, horror movies. And I really loved art, especially Expressionism and Dadaism and Surrealism.
Yeah.
And so when I was in my 20s, I remember I was traveling with my girlfriend in South America, and I remember seeing a movie shoot, and I knew it was a movie shoot. We saw it from the bus as we went down the highway. And I knew it was a big movie shoot because I'd seen Truffaut's Day for Night, and that's how it showed how a movie set was. And before that, I'd never seen anything like that because this is before DVD extras, and now everybody knows how a movie is done. I had dinner that night on the beach, kind of across from the beach.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there eating, and then the movie people came rolling up in their Jeeps, and everybody looked great, and they were real excited, and the guys wore sunglasses, and the women were beautiful, and they made all this noise and drank champagne and talked loud and laughed, and I thought, wow, they're at work, and they're having better time than me on vacation.
Oh.
And I thought, well, I wonder how you could do that. You know, flash forward when the I was doing photography, and I had a dark room, and I ended up with getting into my hands a Bolex 16 millimeter wind-up camera, which was what they used to use for news on television.
Yeah.
And now they were all converting to video. Video was new.
Yeah.
And that camera was became my entry. I started shooting just like I would shoot photographs, and at that time I lived in the country, so
Yeah.
I would shoot my goats, I would shoot my turkeys, and to me it looked like Bergman.
Yeah.
I thought, wow, this is so cool. So I really got interested in that. I had done 8 millimeter when I was a kid, but that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so that kind of got me real interested in it. And then I had also gotten a Betamax machine, one of the first ones, and I recorded a couple movies, The Spiral Staircase and The Killing by Kubrick. I watched them over and over, and for the first time I could see how the shots were broken down. I'd never seen that before. And I got very interested, so I wrote a script based on a friend of mine's short story. And I said, I'm going to try making a movie. And I advertised for somebody who knew what they were doing. And we started shooting with the Bolex.
That sounds wonderful.
And so we did that, made a short film, and until it was all over, and I showed it to my friends, I didn't realize it wasn't any good. I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
And so then instead of dropping it and moving on to something else, I decided to make it into a feature. I'd throw good money after bad. And so I spent another year writing, cutting, shooting, writing, shooting, cutting, writing, shooting, cutting. I turned my art supply store mostly into an editing room. And during that time, I started reading magazines of the business of film. And then I just thought, I want to do this professionally.
Okay.
And I started looking around how to make a movie. I ended up going to LA.
All right. Well, you did kind of answer this before, but was it producer or director that was the first thing that came to mind that you wanted to be?
Well, I didn't know what any of their jobs were because
No.
I'd never studied film. So
Yeah.
I kind of knew that a director was the guy who yelled action.
Yeah.
I kind of knew that.
Yeah.
I didn't have any idea what a producer was. I asked my friend who had gone to college and studied film, and I said, well, what does the producer do? And he said, well, the producer's the boss and he makes the most money. And I thought, well, that's what I want to be, so I'll be the producer. But of course, very quickly I found out that I also wanted to direct because that's a big part of it.
Yes. Your very first credit as producer, like if you look you up on IMDb, that would be Re-Animator. And you did that with Stuart Gordon, who you'd go on to do a lot of stuff with. But how did you two get together on that in particular? Like, did you know him already, or did you find each other?
When I went to Los Angeles, I met a guy named Bob Greenberg, who was very important in my life.
Yeah.
And he was sort of my entry. He introduced me to LA and to the movie business there. He had gone to USC, and he took me to some motion picture shoots, all independent stuff, all the people our age that were making movies. And so he was great, and I was trying to make my own horror movie, and I wanted a director, and I was trying to meet people, and he told me that I should meet Stuart Gordon.
Okay.
He was from Chicago. Stuart was from Chicago. He said, Stuart Gordon has a theater there, and I think you guys will really get along. So I went to Chicago and saw his plays, and I went to his house for dinner, and he told me we were immediately very talking. We were both fans of horror.
Yeah.
And he said he had a couple ideas for making a movie. One of them was Re-Animator.
Oh.
And he already had a 50-page script for television. I said, well, if we can develop it into a feature film, let's do it.
All right.
And so within a year, we were shooting.
Were you in any way surprised that Re-Animator ended up taking off the way it did? Like, it did become quite a hit over time, at least.
It was quite a hit at the beginning.
Yeah.
And was I surprised? I wasn't, because I didn't know any better.
Oh.
It's like Jorg said with Necromantic.
Yeah.
He put the first screening at the cinema and 500 people were there.
Yeah.
He thought, oh, that's the way the movies are.
Oh.
And that's the way I felt. I remember the night before we were going to start the first day of shooting, Stuart had dinner at my house, and I remember saying, you know, I think this movie is charmed. I just had this feeling that this was going to be great.
Okay.
And as we made it, it all seemed to be, every step of the way people would come in to look at it. It was something special. And I think what it was really special about it was that Stuart Gordon was a theater director. He'd spent 10 years learning to direct theater. And I think he brought that sensibility to a horror movie. And we made a real hardcore horror movie.
You did.
But it
You
had,
really did.
But it had a sense of professionalism with the direction.
Yeah.
And then I was determined to make sure it also looked like a real movie, so it had a certain level of professionalism in the photography and in the sound and all the rest. So I think it was like a real horror movie that was like really good.
Yeah.
And so when the first screening was at the Cannes Film Market at midnight at the Star Theater, and it was lined across the block, and the people by the end of the movie were stomping and cheering. And I just thought, well, that's the way the movies are.
Oh.
That's the movie business.
Okay.
So that didn't surprise me because I didn't know any better. Then it was on top 10 lists for the year. It got great reviews. I just thought that's the way it went. And it wasn't until I'd had movies that didn't do as good as I thought that I realized just what a remarkable thing that was. During the 90s, it always had its fans, but during the 90s there wasn't much about Re-Animator. But in the last 5 or 8 years, there's been this renewed interest in the 80s, and Re-Animator's been discovered by a new generation, and now it's clear that it's like one of the all-time horror classics. It's going to be around for a long time.
I think
that's a surprise.
That must be wonderful. Since then, you and Stuart Gordon have done a number of movies together, like From Beyond and Dolls, I believe, and Dagon, back in 2001. What is it that made you keep going back to each other? Like, a lot of producers work with a ton of directors and vice versa, but it's not always you see this partnership that sort of forms.
Well, with Stuart, I think we started together.
Yeah.
So we made 3 or 4 movies together.
Yeah.
Then we did movies apart. I think the thing with Stuart and myself, what Stuart said, we're very different people, by the way. We're very opposite.
Oh, I don't doubt it for a second.
Except that we love horror. But we come at it from a different point of view. The way Stuart puts it is we bring out the worst in each other. And I think there's something to that. When I work with him, I just there's no trouble figuring out the story. Most people I work with, that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
Stuart just does certain things better than anybody, and it just tends to work between us. But we have certainly worked with lots of other people.
Oh yes, I know.
And but sometimes, like The Dentist, Stuart and Dennis Paoli wrote the first treatment. They wrote the first script of The Dentist.
Yeah.
I brought him in often to other projects that I've had. So, and he tries to bring me into stuff. So there's a certain level of knowing that things have worked in the past for us.
Yeah.
And maybe we can repeat that experience.
Okay. So out of these 4 movies that I just mentioned, between you and Stuart, 3 of them are based on H.P. Lovecraft stories. I don't believe Dolls is. I'm a little rusty on my Lovecraft. But is there something about Stuart that you think makes him a really good choice for H.P. Lovecraft? Because a lot of people say his stories are unfilmable. And you have heavily adapted them, to be fair.
Of course, yeah. But I think it's Stuart, he and Dennis Paoli and Bill Norris already had come up with this idea to make Lovecraft Re-Animator as a series. And Re-Animator is not very Lovecraftian.
It
When
isn't.
people talk about Lovecraft, that's like the monkey's paw or something. It's not like the Lovecraft that we know. It's a very good adaptation, I think. From Beyond, we used up the Lovecraft story before the credits, and then we invented everything else.
Yeah.
But it still seems to be it's still an interpretation of the Lovecraft story. Dagon is probably the best adaptation of Lovecraft.
That will be the most straight one, right?
It's most straight, and it's quite clearly, quite directly the movie. I mean, the story. It's very, very close. So there's, I think we had a huge success with Re-Animator, therefore we did From Beyond. We were still young, and that's kind of a remarkable movie as well.
Oh, it is.
So I think that the idea of being a good choice for Lovecraft is because of the history of making Lovecraft. But I think, almost everything Stewart's directed's been good.
It has.
So it's not like it had to be Lovecraft.
Oh no, he's done lots of other great stuff. He certainly has. Your first directing credit would be Society, from 4 years after Re-Animator, I believe, 1989. How did you land that one? I mean, at this point you were known as a producer.
Yeah.
But how does one transition from that? What happened?
Well, I owned the rights. I owned the sequel rights to Re-Animator.
Yeah.
That was my ace in the hole.
Oh, that.
I had some name value at that time. I had a track record with Re-Animator and From Beyond, and I had trouble. I was in a position where I wanted to start directing.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine had started a new company, and I always look for the things that are starting up, the new stuff.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be working within that. I thought an opportunity, and he had financing from Japan, and so I said, "Listen, why don't we make the Re-Animator sequel?" Of course, he wants to do it.
Of course.
And I said, "But we have to make another movie first that I direct."
Oh, well,
because I thought if I didn't do a good job on the first one, I want another chance.
Yeah.
So I figured Re-Animator had to be second.
That was a sneaky move, I gotta say.
It's strategy.
I
call it strategy.
It is. But this would also be how you got the gigs for both Re-Animator sequels, that you had the rights.
Yes.
That includes Beyond.
Yeah.
Okay, that basically answers my next question, so we're going to skip that one. Hold on for a second. You've also directed and produced sequels to already existing franchises before. You did Return of the Living Dead 3, I believe you produced and...
produced and directed.
You did direct it, sorry.
Yeah.
I can't read the whole question real quick. And also Silent Night, Deadly Night 4 and Silent Night, Deadly Night 5. I believe you directed the fourth one too. None of these have anything to do with their original, like the first one, or even the first two in the case of Silent Night, Deadly Night. Why is this? Like, was it a pure marketing thing to just give them the title? Or?
No, I think what it was is that I always was just hoping I would get another chance to direct.
Okay.
And so I'm not the guy who ever turned anything down.
No.
And so when something came up, I jumped on it. And I used it as an excuse to make a movie.
That's perfectly
pretty much the
understandable.
way I did it. Yeah.
Okay, it's just that these are so remarkably different that one wonders.
Yeah, I think with Return of the Living Dead 3, I loved the first movie.
Yeah.
And I loved the Romero first two movies.
Yeah.
And this was kind of a hybrid, unofficial sequel to a classic. And I really wanted to do both of them justice. But for some reason, I didn't do humor in it, even though the original was very funny. And normally I put a lot of irony and humor in the movies I make. And somehow when I was developing Return of the Living Dead 3,
that got very dark.
Well, I just didn't go for the funny stuff. It's funny. I mean, it's really odd. I really played it straight, and I didn't make it really a decision to. When I went to the company, I said, well, what are the requirements? because the second one they even used the same actors and characters
Yeah.
that had already died.
Yeah.
And I said, well, do I have to use any of the original actors or characters? And they said no. And I said, well, does it have to be funny? And they said no. And I said, well, what are the requirements? And they said, well, you have to have the trioxin gas
Yeah.
and you have to have brain eating. If you do that, anything else, it's up to you.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh.
So, but I tried to find a logical explanation for the brain eating.
Yeah.
So I took it all very seriously and made a whole mythology. And the writer wasn't writing comedy. John
No.
Penny.
Yeah.
I heard pitches from like 20 different writers,
Yeah.
and he's the one that I chose. What I wanted when I talked to the writers is I said I want the zombie to be the main character, because back then, imagine this is 1990.
Yeah, that hadn't been done before, had it?
I thought there's been too many zombie movies. Gosh, how can I make another zombie movie? Imagine today, right? And so I thought, how can I make it different? And I thought, well, if the zombie's the main character, it'll be different. Plus, it'll by nature be different. And plus, on the other side, I had done the Bride of Re-Animator, and the bride shows up just in the last 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And she's the best character. And I thought, wow, I wish I'd had the bride in it for longer. So this was kind of like making a whole movie about the bride, in a way. In a
Yeah, I
way.
can
I mean,
see
it's
that.
not exactly, but in a way.
No, but I can see what you mean.
know?
I can definitely see what you mean.
And so
with
that was what really interested me. And then John Penny had the idea of a Romeo and Juliet type story of a love. And so then it was, what if he's in love and his girlfriend dies and she's a zombie? How's that going to play out?
Yeah.
And so that's where, but why I didn't go comedy, I just don't know. Because I
And-
normally do.
Yeah,
I
and-
normally go humorous.
And the other thing with Silent Night movies being so vastly different,
Oh.
you just had a different idea, I guess.
You know, I just didn't know. I guess I just didn't take the movie. It'd been so long and all
Yeah.
that. I confess, I didn't take it seriously.
No. Okay.
And they already had a script for the first one, and then I just redid it with the guy who did the writer of Society.
Yeah.
And also with Screaming Mad George, and I was obsessed with trying to do simulacra,
Yeah.
which is making images that have two images in one.
Yeah.
And I was really obsessed with that. I really wanted to push all these abstract. It seems stupid to say it. I don't think Silent Night 4 is a very good movie, but it definitely, the intention of it, it's almost like a real art movie.
Yeah.
It's like almost an experimental film. And honestly, at that time, I was just out of control, I guess, because we just tried all kinds of ideas that didn't work, that maybe half worked, and just kept pushing and pushing. On the next one, I wrote it, and I wrote the story, and I tried to get it more like a Christmas thing.
Yeah.
And then my script supervisor directed it.
All right. So, well, we talked a lot about horror. You're definitely best known as a horror guy. There's no doubt there. But you have dipped into some other genres. You worked a little on the Honey I Shrunk I was about to call it the audience. The Kids, Honey I Shrunk the Kids franchise. You worked a little on a Tarzan TV series, I believe, and on
Well,
Conan.
on Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, that idea, Stuart and I wrote the story.
Yeah.
And I was the original producer until
Yeah.
Stuart quit as the director. So
Yeah.
I supervised all the set building and everything.
Yeah, I'm sort of building up to a
Yeah.
thing here. But you're either the first or one of the first to adapt Japanese media into American film. You've done The Guyver, and you've done Crying Freeman. Is that
And
the
I
right
did,
title?
yeah, that's right.
Crying Freeman. The Guyver and Crying Freeman. What was it about a Japanese story? Nobody had done this. What was it about manga that got you thinking this would make an awesome movie?
Well, once again, it was just because Society and Crying Freeman were financed by Japanese.
Oh,
And so I was dealing with Japanese all the time.
yeah.
And they wanted to They on Guyver, they wanted Screaming Mad George wanted to make Guyver, and he got Steve Wang to be a partner, and the Japanese were okay, but as long as I produced it. So they brought the project to me.
Okay.
And then I developed it and produced it. And with Crying Freeman, the Japanese gave me a whole pile of DVDs of animes and said, will you develop some of this into movies? And I found interest in Crying Freeman. I picked out a couple that I liked, and Crying Freeman was one. And then I was able to finance it. I was also working on one that I didn't make called the Devilman.
Oh, Devilman! I have heard about that.
We did a lot of work on Devilman, but it never got made.
That's such a shame. That would have been fantastic to see.
Yeah, and then also for the Japanese, I made I did the live action of a Sony PlayStation game in Japan called X the Unsolved.
Really? I had no idea. It's always nice to be surprised. But so of all these, it's hold on, I have to read this. This is so unprofessional. Re-Animator is definitely your best known movie as a producer, society best known as a director. I don't think we can skate around that fact. Mm-hmm. But are there any of your movies as a director or as a producer that you feel should get a bit more attention than it does?
Well, I think Return of the Living Dead 3 is really good.
It is.
I think that movie holds up.
Yeah.
Most of my movies as a director and often as a producer, they are flawed. Some of them are seriously flawed. I would have a hard time watching them. But all of them have really cool stuff in it. I mean, every movie I've made, there's something in it that I really love.
Yeah.
Even though it may falter. And so, but with Return of the Living Dead 3, that movie is kind of about what we tried to do, and it kind of holds up. It didn't have those really failing parts of it.
No.
And most of the movies I've done have that. So that's one of them. Another one that I think really kind of worked was The Dentist. Yeah. And the only problem with The Dentist for me is the whole sound part of it. It was just done, I mean, it was so inexpensive, and it was done as well as could be done. But I'd love to remix The Dentist and re-record the music, do it exactly the same. It's just that I never hear it. It's just not there.
Well, I can say as much as the teeth crunching definitely freaks me the hell out.
Well, I think The Dentist is a movie that's good. A movie that's very uneven, but I wish could be seen, but it's kind of buried, is Necronomicon. Not because I think it's a great movie, but because it's such an interesting one. Yeah. It really is a great experiment. And once again, it's very uneven, but there's something really cool about it that I like. I mean, if I was watching it with an audience, I would groan a few times. It would be hard for me in certain spots, but other things I really, really like about it. All right. I like Beyond Re-Animator quite a bit. I think it's also flawed like everything else, but I really love how I really tried on Beyond Re-Animator, besides the fact that it was shot in Spain with all Spaniards, that I really liked. I tried very hard to make subplots, and I loved putting the rat as a character, because I wanted to do like a Disney type movie where you have the big people and then you have the mouse.
Yeah, I get it.
And so I had this whole mouse running through the movie, and I just thought that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, so as a closing thing, for someone who just wants to start, like they're at the DSLR phone level, have no money, have no experience whatsoever, they just want to make a movie, producing or directing, what would you say to them as one condensed piece of advice?
Well, I would say 1, do it.
Yeah,
and 2, do it seriously.
Yeah.
Even with no money, no nothing, do it seriously. Try to be as intelligent and serious and professional as possible, even with no money, and get people to work with that aren't fooling around. Yeah. That really look at it and say, this is we're going to do this in a professional way.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was really great.
Okay.
So, thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.